Welcome to East Meets West. Today I have a very special friend and a speaker. He's a pastor. He's an ordained pastor of the Church of God of Prophecy in Port-au-Prince. And he has been involved in leadership training, advocacy, community development for more than 15 years with the Micah Challenge, the Global Leadership Summit, Food the Hungry, and Living Water International. Pastor Valery, I call him Valery, believes that the gospel is for the whole church. Consequently, he has worked across denominational lines with evangelicals, mainline churches, as well as Anglican and Catholic leaders. Valery is the hub director for the Urban Training Collaborative, where he develops incarnational leaders who see and celebrate the good news of Jesus Christ in hard places. Valery is presently, in fact, he's completing his master's in transformational leadership. So I'm going to welcome Valery to the screen here, as you can see, and very much, I would say, intellectual person and a servant leader by heart too, and my friend. Valery, do you want to add anything? As today we're going to talk about Christian leader and how we can bridge, different sector with your leadership skills. And so this is going to be interesting for all of us here as we can learn from Valery. Valery, do you want to add anything before you go into?
Well, Shanti, it's a pleasure to be with you and with your audience. And I have a passion for leadership, definitely. And especially to see how the church can go beyond its four walls and connect definitely with the business sector and the social sector to bring out transformation, because the gospel, I believe, is transformative. But many times we tend to have a one-sided perspective of leadership. So I am very glad today to be with your audience. And I'm glad also that God has allowed me to be able to connect with different sectors and see some of the reasons why sometimes churches do not want to bridge with business leaders, and business leaders do not want to have a close relationship with churches, but also to see how each sector can leverage what they have and connect with each other and bring about great change in community. So I am happy to be with you, and I hope our conversation here will be at least inspiring to some of your audience.
Definitely. And Valery, indeed, I want to thank you for taking the time out to add value to us. And as I said, it's going to be interesting, and I'm looking forward to learning and hearing how you, as a pastor and all these different areas that, your perspective, your worldview of how you used your leadership, skills, and how you've bridged these gaps that we're seeing in our world pretty much. So from Haiti, let us hear Valery. And Valery, all over to you. Tell us how did you do this, some of your leadership lessons even that we can learn from.
Well, let me give you some historical background. I'm a third generation pastor. My grandfather was a pastor and my dad as well. But my grandfather came from a business family and he was involved in politics. And once he received his call, he went directly into the ministry. But for some reason, he always had relationships with politicians and business owners. So he couldn't stay away from that. And same thing with my father. He was a pastor, but much involved in civil society activities. And he believed a lot in economic and social transformation. So coming from that background, I understood that a church leader cannot think that his or her role is mainly to preach the gospel and then send people to heaven. A church leader needs to have a political, economic, and social impact. So when I first received my call, I thought I would go to seminary, but my first degree was in business. And I first started working with successful business owners, and I could hear their perspective of the church. I struggled a lot with God, telling him that my role is not in business. My role was in the church. But years went by where I would always be around business leaders, and that's how I made a living. But at the same time, on Saturday and Sundays, I was, with church folks and so forth, and I could hear their perception of leaders as well, of business leaders. That is, they're just making money and then they're ripping people off sometimes, or they're mainly thinking about economics and not about, either the society or their faith. So I could understand both people's perspective. So that's why one main thing that I did is to build relationship with several business leaders, but also church leaders from different denominations to understand where they are. Because one key thing with church leaders is the fact that they know the communities. They know what they're going through. They know what the families are going through. They know what poverty is about. Or if they're living in a wealthy country, they know what family issues are. They know that beyond economics, they know what social issues are. So they can translate that, all right? But many times, the business skill to address those issues are not present. And that's a key problem. Whereas sometimes business leaders think that church leaders do not understand how to manage organizations and leverage things. So the first thing that I did is to sit in a place of humility, to understand what I knew and what I did not know, and sit and start listening instead of thinking either I had a business degree. I remember my first class of finance. I was so happy and spoke to my dad about it. And he told me that you cannot just translate everything in the business world directly to the church. I was shocked until I became a church leader. And I realized that we can take things from the business schools, but skillfully apply them in the social sector, not mainly a business perspective. Same thing. Business leaders had to sit and understand how people are living their family lives and so forth, that you cannot have a successful business when a person is struggling so much in his or her family, and you don't take into account that aspect. So the first lesson that I learned is sit in a chair of humility and start listening to both sectors and understand where they're standing from. The second lesson that I learned is to understand that communication is key when you're bridging different sectors. Church folks have their own lingos. Sometimes church people are talking as if everybody understand what they're saying. I had to sit and understand that I needed to be a translator. I speak different languages, so I understand what it means to render a specific word to another language. But the key thing is to understand the culture of the person listening to me, so that I can choose from three words the right word. So I had to sit and understand the church's culture and communicate the business perspective in a way that the church person could understand and see the value of the other person. Same thing, translate the church perspective of development to a business owner, where that person needed to sit in a chair also of humility and understand that church people know about social issues. They understand how to address those things. But here's how you need to understand that from your leadership chair. So communication was a huge thing for me, and it it is still a challenge as the world is changing, because today the church is evolving quickly, and to understand the value of different sectors in their ranks. The third thing, and I bit my finger, Shanti, regarding that, is to encourage church leaders to bring more lay people into the church's business. And I bit my fingers because some pastors couldn't understand how someone who doesn't have a theological degree, someone who does not need to be a pastor, that person is not aspiring to be a pastor because he or she is saying, this is not my call, but they have that skill, to encourage church leaders to have people with business skills into the church's leadership, people who have skills in social sciences, and help you understand how to serve the communities better, but also how to sit together and think about the development of leadership and the development of your community, but also to develop yourself as a church leader into other skill sets. Because spending 4 years in seminary, probably most seminarians don't have classes on finance. They don't, where money management is key. They don't have classes on how to manage your human resources, and the church is an organization. If they have a class of sociology, is an introduction to sociology, whereas where the church pastor needs to have great skills in sociology because they're serving different communities. So you may not have those skill sets, but if you have someone who understands it, and then sit with you and you have a conversation, that person will understand your perspective as well, because you're bringing that theological aspect, which is men and women are created in the image of God. And here's the problem of society and so forth. So not thinking from a secular perspective, but bringing a Christian theological perspective into the world's problems. And that person that has a background in sociology will bridge that with a 21st century of what is happening, and also both can address those issues and have a business-minded person sitting with you and say, let us develop strategies to help. So as we usually say in the Urban Training Collaborative, that the world needs to be our classes. The streets need to be our classes. That is, we sit as leaders and understand what is going on in the streets, but also the world needs to be our parish. When John Wesley was kicked out of the church and people told him, where will you preach? He said, the world is my parish. We need to understand as leaders that the world is our parish, but the world is complex. A business leader cannot address all the issues of the world. Theologians say that the 18th years that the Bible does not mention about Jesus, he only sat and analyzed the world. That's how he was so skillful in using parables that connected directly either with Pharisees or people from different perspectives. So the world needs to be our parish, but also our classes. And the world will be our playground. That is where we as different leaders sit and try. And that's maybe, I think I'm on my fourth leadership lesson, is as leaders, we need to understand that we will fail. We will fail. Because on the playground, we play, we win, and we fail as well. And, leaders have big egos. So when we fail, we tend to think that we are a failure. You are not a failure, because the world is complex. Sitting together, working your leadership with different people from different angles, you will understand when to pass the ball. and when also the person needs to pass the ball to yourself. As a leader, I have people who've worked for the longest in the corporate world. And sometimes they tell me, why don't you apply this and this, or talk to your congregation in this and this way? And I tell them, well, I understand your perspective, but I know the church's context and culture. Let me deal with that. And after that, the person tells me, oh, okay, now I realize that you understand the context. The skill sets that I'm bringing are good, but translating that directly to a specific community needs someone who understands that. The same way, sometimes I just sit and say, well, that's your field of expertise. Why don't you work directly? Because this is not my field of expertise. So it's important for us to understand that to have an impact on the world, we need to have a table where we sit as Jesus sat on a table with a business person, Matthew. You know, Matthew was a tax collector. He knew his skill, his thing, all right? We need to sit also with someone like Peter, who is a businessman as well. You know, he's a fisherman, James as well. But sometimes you need to sit with a politician, Simon the Zealot, because he was a kind of politician that you and I wouldn't want to sit with because he was fierce. But sitting at a table with people from those different perspectives can make you understand the context in which you are working much better and then have a greater impact. So Paul didn't preach the gospel. He didn't lead churches the same way that Peter did. But the finality of it is more than 2,000 years later, the gospel is strong and it is going forward. So Jesus was a skilled leader who understood how to bring different perspectives around a table and then for people to sit. And I think today, encouraging leaders to move out of their silos. That is, well, I'm a business leader. I'm focusing only on the business aspect. I will let community leaders deal with, you know, drug and violence, teenage pregnancy, and so forth. I will send money to those organizations, and then pastors sitting on their leadership desk, thinking of, you know, how can I bring those people to the church and preach the gospel to them, with them expecting Jesus Christ to come and then bring them to heaven. No, we can sit together and bring about the kingdom, or start working together and see and give glimpses of the kingdom on earth, people of good faith and of goodwill.
Valery, before you continue, you know, there's so many things coming to my mind as you're speaking, and I could remember my first class in my MBA, you know, talking about theology of work and learning. And I remember, you know, I thought that as a Christian, I need to stop working. So I worked in a business with my husband, and I thought, you know what? I need to become a missionary, and I have to leave the church, leave the work, and go join the church full time, and you know, do missionary work. And but you know, as you speak, I think of, you know, how does the church help, you know, their congregation, the people that they're sharing with, you know, to let them know that business is also, you know, something blessed. Business is something also part of God's plan, and that, you know, as church leaders, how they could help their congregation to also see that. And it's not that, you know, like for me, I had to learn that I can be a missionary in the work, the business that I am doing, that the business is the mission. The business is a, you know, where I can be used to actually be a missionary. But these concepts are not so clearly spoken or encouraged, I see in many churches. And as you said, you know, it's how do you bring all these. And yes, in churches have politicians, and churches have business owners, they have other community workers, and but how much does the church encourage these people on their journey here? How much do they actually indeed sit at the table, as you're saying, to listen from the perspective of all these people? And that we don't think that, because we are the church leaders, we know it all.
Mhm.
I love that you said that, the humility to listen from different perspectives. And indeed, I do believe in the verse that we're all made to do great works.
Mhm.
And indeed, my value, I am not a pastor. I don't, like you are, but I'm from a business perspective. And indeed, it's a, it's an honor to know that a pastor would like to learn from you, right? And likewise, I get to learn also from how can I adopt, biblical principles to run my business so that it built on more ethic and morals that is in line with helping adding value to people's life, the community, the country, whatever, so that what I do, it's also in line with that. And so, I remember someone was sharing how the pastor used to go into his business and pray for the business, pray for the employees of the business, and so that they encourage others, and there's this kind of collaboration
Yes.
happening, not a separation that now we need to go bring everybody together and understand we all play a role in building our country here in some way or the other. That
Yes, I think it's a misunderstanding of what our mission here is. Even you don't need to have a New Testament theology to understand that every single person has a calling. And the job of the, or one of the jobs of the pastor is to help people understand that their calling is beyond preaching and teaching in the church or singing in the church. Because as Wesley said, the world is your parish. Think about, for instance, Daniel. He was an advisor to a king. He wasn't a preacher. His job was in a palace. Think about Priscilla and Aquila. They were business people, tent makers, all right? But at the same time, they were preaching. Think about Deborah. She was a leader, you would say. She may have been the president or the prime minister of that time. Think about David. We love David as a singer, as a poet, all right? And we love David as a writer. But we also need to understand that David was a politician. He was a king, all right? He was a king. So we love the Apostle Paul. We endear him. But the Apostle Paul was a businessman. He was a tent maker. So looking at that, we definitely need to understand that pastors need to help people understand their calling and for them to answer that call.
Definitely, indeed. And I think, I can see, and I'm not hitting anyone here, but I do see sometimes how the pastors is only about their church and their church members. And, instead of, can I see it holistically that we are together in this here, right? And I like the part, that you said the street needs to be our classes. And indeed, if we're not getting out there, how do we learn from others? And I think when we are we hear different perspectives, our understanding becomes richer, and
Yes.
we are able to make better decisions because now we can see holistically the situation than just seeing it from maybe, from one perspective, I would say. And so, yes, indeed, learning is one. And then also, I like the part that you had started off saying, the church is not the four walls, and that, the world is our parish. And so, maybe you can share a little bit more on that there so that others can understand, because I do see people think that the church is just, you go to church in this building and the building is a church, but they just not understanding really what that means.
Well, the church is God's people everywhere that they are. God's people with a call to make disciples, yes, and to show God's glory, as Paul writes in Ephesians 3. So it is God's people called to live for him and then bring about his glory into the world. So the church is not the four walls. If we believe that, 2020 taught us differently, because during the COVID pandemic, most of us couldn't attend a physical church, but many people got in relationship with Jesus Christ outside of the four corners of the church. I don't know if you hear me well or if I'm lagging.
I'm hearing.
Okay, so this is, let me say that differently. About 15 years ago, I was talking to a seminary friend. He was a seminary teacher. I wanted to convince him that one of the greatest gifts that I've had is to work in what is called the secular world. He could not understand. And I told him it'll be difficult for someone to pastor and work in the secular world. However, it will be a great gift. And I told him, because of that, I will understand the church members better. Because of that, I can be able to understand their challenges better. Because of that, I will be in step with what's going on in the world. And years later, he kind of starting to understand the value of that, because you will understand and you will be able to help your congregation be the hands, the feet, and the mouth of Jesus Christ where they are directly. Because Jesus's greatest impact was not in the synagogues. Jesus's greatest impact was on the streets, preaching to people, healing the sick, and redeeming and restoring either the prostitute woman in John 8, or healing the woman with the issue of blood, or sitting at the well with the Samaritan woman in John 4. So we can be those people who are directly in those places, because Shanti, let us be honest with ourselves. Some people will never set a foot in a church, never, for one reason or another. But I can be the church for that person directly where he or she is, and talk about Christ and serve that person well. Let's say first, serve that person well in my business with excellence. And I can start a conversation with that when the person tells me, why are you serving me? You have the same business with so-and-so, but you have integrity. Your services are impeccable. What's going on? And then this is an open door for you to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with that person. For instance, sometimes I go to a bank and I see at 9 or 10 a.m., the teller is so tired. Directly, there's something in my mind. She's going through a difficult moment. And I start asking her, how are you? And the person answers with the head down, writing on the slip. And I say again, how are you? And that person just lifts her head up and say, well, I'm fine. And I say, you are not fine. I see sadness and so forth. And I start a conversation with that person that goes beyond the daily business deal that I'm doing. And this is the same thing that we can do as well as business owners, going beyond selling and making money. Be the church directly where the person is. So the church leader can be that tool that God uses to release his or her church members into the world as world agents, as world people of transformation, directly in the parliament, directly in the classrooms, directly in the business field, and share the gospel of Jesus Christ, not as a pastor with a Bible in his or her hand, but directly as someone who is actually making money, and share the gospel in that person's way. That's why we also as pastors need humility to understand that you, Shanti, can develop a way to preach the gospel, which is different from me. You know, you don't need to open the Bible, as someone told me recently. She was convincing me that I shouldn't be a pastor because I never quote a Bible directly to her. And because what she's used to is to have pastors quoting the Bibles all the time. And I tell her, well, we've never had that conversation before, but the way that I'm living around you will set those questions. And we spent 40 minutes talking about the gospel, talking about Jesus Christ, and talking about the church. But I've never met her in a church setting, but I've met her in a business setting, and we can have those life eternal changing conversations.
Definitely. And, I like that, we can be simple. As leaders, indeed, that we will fail. And I think, though, that some of the leaders, they're afraid if they fail, then what would people think of them, right?
Exactly.
And so it's, for me, even learning that you don't need to know everything, and someone else, can know it. And it's okay that you can tap into them to learn from them. But how open, as you said, people are, especially the leaders in the church, in all the different spheres, their ego gets in the way. And then, instead of them being more effective, they end up just making things maybe worse or so, whether it's relationship wise or whatever it is. But I do hear you, and I appreciate that you learning of humility, of communication, culture, and listening to people that not necessarily might have. And I like the part that you talk about lay people in the church. I do see some church leaders allow others to serve on their boards and what's not, but indeed, how open can you be so that you can learn? These are the people who are out there. And
Yes.
I do like, I know also many pastors who actually work, and that are pastors. They have a regular day job, and then there are some who don't work, which is okay. I mean, everyone need to know what area they are focused on or what's not. But indeed, having different people on your team, per se, I would say your team, that you get to hear the different perspectives, and you get to hear. And I think this is where we get to learn more, as you said, that we just don't get in this bubble of seeing things from one angle here. And I am a Christian. I do love the Lord. I will say honestly here that I do not agree with the way some people go about sharing their faith in this kind of demanding kind of way, that you do this, you must do. But indeed, how can your life tells the story, right? How can you in your way put it over so that they can see it, and being able to match what they're hearing to what they're living right now. I think that's where people are not getting that connection. Okay, this is my faith. How does my faith line up to being a nurse? How does
Mm-hmm.
my faith line up to being a garbage collector? How I can be used in all these different areas. Then I don't need to be a pastor, but how do I see myself working in all these different areas and still contributing to a bigger purpose in life, right? And so I do appreciate you sharing these points, and I would ask anything else you would like to add before we close this conversation, because this is a very big, if I know if I hold you here on the political side of it, on the economic side of it, the social side, there's so many things that we could go into and talk about. But I love that you bring out these points that as leaders in these different areas, how we can learn what can we do differently so that we can connect, we can share, we can build a better world, I would say.
Yes, definitely. Maybe two things. Sitting under and understand each other's perspective is key. Someone may be working in the business world or in the political world. The pastor is working as well. Actually, pastor is a hard work, because you deal with lots of emotions and so forth. So this is this aspect, this perspective. But sitting and bridging, to me, that's a key word, the bridge. It is the key word, so that we can sit and understand each other's perspective and listen. Jesus asked questions a lot. He was a questioner. So that's where we need to sit. If we sit at the questioning side of things, we will do wonders sitting with people. So it was a pleasure to be with you. And hopefully some of your listeners will understand that their call is not necessarily to be in the business world. It is to be in the church. They need to understand that their skills, the grace and gift is there. Some will understand that their call is not in the business world. It is in politics. They will need to focus on that. Some will understand that it's not at the parliament, but in the business world. However, the aim needs to be God's glory and the transformation of his world.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Valerie. And you have added a lot of value to us. You have opened our perspective from different angles here that we can see now. And I do hope that, some of our viewers can share it also with their pastors, with the business owners and others that, can benefit from just listening from a different angle of how can we actually tackle things that are happening in our society. And so I do appreciate again your time of taking out and being here, and we do look forward for you joining us in the next time and continue sharing and adding value to us all. So thank you very much, Valerie. And
thank you for having me, and it'll be a pleasure to have a conversation again.
yes. So take care and be safe.